What are you still doing here? The shift ended 3 hours ago." Isabella shuddered. The director of the factory was standing in front of her, staring menacingly at her. It was the first time she had seen him so close, and only now she realized that he was quite young. He looked no more than 30 years old. "I am sorry," whispered Isabella. "I truly need the money, and I asked the master to let me work overtime." "So the security guards know too, don't they? What's going on here?" said the director angrily, and gestured for Isabella to follow him. Isabella sighed, thinking that now she would definitely lose such a necessary part-time job. She followed the boss to the exit. "Mr. Hill, what's going on here? Why are the employees on the factory premises after closing time?" asked the man to the security guard. "Nothing bad. Isabella works here, and sometimes overtime." Damon only shook his head and, opening the door, released Isabella outside. The girl jumped out into the street and, almost crying with resentment, quickly went away. As soon as the door closed, Mr. Hill, who had been working at the factory since the days when Damon's father was the head, reproached the young director. "Oh, why did you do that to her? The girl is struggling to get by and taking care of her ill stepmother." Damon stared at Mr. Hill, and he explained that the girl's father had died in a car accident, and her stepmother had also suffered and had become disabled. Since then, Isabella sacrificed everything to take care of a sick woman. Thinking about what he had heard, Damon quickly said goodbye and went out. He caught up with Isabella after a couple of minutes and, stopping beside her, offered her a ride. The girl looked at him and silently walked on. But Damon was persistent. "Come on, get in. I want to help you." Isabella thought for a while and then got into the car and told him the address. Realizing that she lived on the other side of the city, Damon was surprised. But hearing that the girl got up early every morning to catch the only bus, and at night she went home on foot, he was really shocked. He imagined how many dangers could lie in wait for a young woman on the street at night, and the decision came unexpectedly. "Isabella, I want to suggest that you transfer to another department, on the second floor. Even though the work there is more difficult, but the salary is much higher. Do you think you can handle it?" "Of course, I have already replaced colleagues there more than once," said Isabella, and looked at the boss fearfully, realizing that she said too much again. Damon laughed, and Isabella decided to justify herself and stand up for her colleagues. "But we didn't do anything bad. The girls are young, they need to hang out, and I don't go anywhere. And the senior foreman, Helen, would never let me if I couldn't handle it." "That's for sure. You know, sometimes I'm afraid of her myself," said Damon, and laughed again. Now Isabella laughed too, and Damon was surprised to notice how unrecognizably changed this unremarkable, at first glance, girl. "Isabella, let's drink coffee," he asked suddenly. "It won't take long, just half an hour." Isabella smiled. The boss turned out to be a very kind, cheerful, and caring man. But she had to give her stepmother some medicine, so she suggested that Damon have coffee at her place, and he immediately agreed. After opening the door, Isabella shouted to her stepmother that they had guests. A woman got out of the room in a wheelchair with a disgruntled expression on her face. "Well, why are you so late? Do you want me to feel bad?" said the woman instead of a greeting. Damon smiled charmingly at her and introduced himself. Mrs. Wilson blurred into a smile. She could not imagine that Isabella could have such a decent acquaintance. The young woman quickly prepared the medicine and tried to give it to Mrs. Wilson, but she only brushed it off. "Take it to the room. You're late anyway, and now if I feel bad, it'll be on your conscience." Isabella turned away, but Damon could see that she was struggling to hold back her tears. It also seemed to him that Mrs. Wilson was feeling much better than she was trying to show. Several days passed. Damon thought it over and decided to talk to Isabella about her stepmother's health. The man stopped by during Isabella's lunch break to see how she was doing with her new job. When he checked that everything was fine, he arranged to meet with her after her shift to discuss an important matter. Isabella was puzzling until the evening, wondering what Damon really wanted to talk about, because in fact, except for work, nothing connected them. In the evening, she walked out of the factory gate and immediately noticed Damon's car. When he saw her, he smiled, and without embarrassment, in front of her colleagues, waved. The girl blushed, but came over. "Isabella, aren't you sick? You're blushing," said Damon anxiously. "No, I'm fine. So, what did you want to talk about?" asked Isabella after getting over her emotions. "Oh, not here. Let me treat you to coffee after all." Isabella agreed with pleasure, and in 10 minutes they were already sitting in a small, cozy cafe. Isabella could not remember the last time she was in a similar place. Having made an order, Damon attentively looked at her. "Isabella, don't you think your stepmother is not as sick as she tries to show you?" Isabella looked at him in amazement. "What do you mean? Mrs. Wilson ended up in a wheelchair because of a car accident. My father was driving, and since he's gone, that means I have to take care of her." "Strange logic, but that's not what I mean," Damon remarked in surprise. "The point is that hopeless patients confined to wheelchairs behave differently. Believe me, I know what I'm talking about. My grandfather spent 10 years in a wheelchair." Isabella did not understand what Damon was trying to say to her. He began to ask her where Mrs. Wilson was being examined, and Isabella remembered that her stepmother was being treated by some doctor with whom she had been a friend. "It can't be, and why would she need to pretend to be disabled? It's better to have a full life, isn't it? But if you're right, I still don't know how to check it all out. No doctor will talk to me for sure. I'm not a relative to her." "Isabella, what about installing a camera?" "Oh, really? First of all, I don't have that possibility, and second, it would be ugly if she wouldn't notice." Damon smiled. He liked the fact that Isabella, unlike any other girl, did not stubbornly insist on her point of view, and listened to his sensible arguments. He promised to find a camera model that would be masked, and her stepmother would definitely not guess. "All right, let's do it. I want to see what she is doing all day long because she never even cleans up her cup." A few days passed. The camera was already set up. Damon gave Isabella a ride home. Before the girl disappeared behind the door of the house, he asked her to be sure to call him as soon as she watched the tape. She nodded to him and ran up the stairs. "Mrs. Wilson, I'm home." "Why are you yelling? I dozed off just before you had come," grumbled the woman grudgingly. Isabella did not answer and decided first to feed Mrs. Wilson, and then to see in peace what the camera had recorded. An hour later, she locked herself in her room, took out her old laptop, and started watching. The image was without sound, but it didn't matter. From the first seconds, the girl froze with her eyes wide open. And then, after saving the video, she quickly called Damon and asked him to come over. They sat together in his car with the laptop and watched intently as Mrs. Wilson threw off the blanket and stood on her feet. First, she did a frantic dance around the room, and then abruptly went somewhere. After a while, she returned, but not alone. At this spot, Isabella blushed thickly and turned away. "Why? I don't understand. Why did she need all this comedy?" "She's just very well settled," explained Damon. "She didn't work when your father was alive, and now why would she? She has you. Only now it has become more difficult for her because you spend less time at work." And Isabella suddenly remembered how a couple of days before Mrs. Wilson literally forced her to look for a second job, so as not to sit at home for nothing. The girl had not paid attention then, but now the picture was completely clear. Isabella's indignation was boundless. She decided that she would not allow this hypocrite, for whom she had to give up her studies at university, to continue living shamelessly at her expense. Isabella was beautiful in her anger, and Damon smiled with admiration. "Thank you, Damon, and now I'm going to go and bring her to clean water." "I'm with you, just in case," Damon stated firmly. Isabella silently entered Mrs. Wilson's room. Damon followed. The stepmother was surprised by the unexpected visit and the militant look of the couple. Isabella opened her laptop and turned on the video. Mrs. Wilson didn't make a sound until the video reached the part where she returned to the house with her friend. "How dare you! I'll sue you!" squealed Mrs. Wilson. "No problem. Sue me, and I'll sue you, too," said Isabella firmly. "Haven't you ever felt sorry for me? I left education for your sake, blamed myself for my father's mistake, even though it wasn't my fault at all. You are not my family member at all, and therefore, pack your things and get out of my apartment." Mrs. Wilson tried to press pity, saying that she had nowhere to go because Isabella's father had left her no place to live. But the girl was adamant. "That's your problem. I give you an hour to pack, or the police will come here, and they will ask many unpleasant questions to you and your doctor, who was on the video," said Isabella, and looked at Mrs. Wilson in a way that made her squeeze. Damon and Isabella were sitting in the kitchen when the door slammed. Damon put his hand on Isabella's hand. "You know, I regret now that I came up with this camera idea," he sighed, "because now you'll probably leave the factory, and I won't see you smile again." "Do you need to see it so much?" The girl was embarrassed. "You have no idea how much." 6 months later, Isabella returned to the university. She really had to leave the factory because she had to make up for lost time and study hard. But now Damon saw her smile much more often than before. They got married, and every morning he woke up his beloved with a kiss. Narrated by Deidre Eby.